Hello and welcome to Resolutions, a podcast about dispute resolution and prevention. I'm your host, Jason Harper. The Resolutions podcast is a project created by the ABA section of dispute resolution to increase the avenues where we can connect. Today, we will be discussing mediation education, as well as the ABA's annual Advanced Mediation and Advocacy Skills Training Institute that will take place virtually on December 1st through the 3rd of 2022. Here to discuss those topics are Dr. Debra Dupree and Harold Coleman. Dr. Debra Dupree is a dispute resolution specialist, conflict coach, mindset doctor, international trainer, and keynote speaker, as well as podcast host of the show Decoding the Conflict Mindset. She is an avid educator, teaching at the California State University San Marcos, California Western School of Law, National University, Ryokan College, and on the faculty for the American Arbitration Association, also known as AAA. She teaches internationally as a workshop series instructor for Hong Kong Institute of Mediation and City University of Hong Kong Law School. With over 30 years of experience, Dr. Dupree has served as a board member on a number of local and national dispute resolution associations to advance and promote the field of mediation for peacemaking solutions. And she currently serves on the AAA Employment Mediation Panel and actively mediates workplace disputes. Harold Coleman Jr. has amassed over 30 productive years in the dispute resolution field as a civil litigator, arbitrator, mediator, ADR teacher, and trainer. He has tried, deliberated, and awarded hundreds of complex commercial and construction disputes in the role of American Arbitration Association appointed arbitrator. He has also negotiated settlements for hundreds of complex technical, commercial, employment, and probate matters in the role of American Arbitration Association, AAA, and Superior Court of California appointed mediator and conciliator. For the past 10 years, Harold has served the AAA leadership team as a senior executive for mediation, and in that role oversees the association's diverse mediation and professional development initiatives.
Next Level Mediation software is a mediator's best tool for advancing their online dispute resolution practice. It takes into account the psychological attitudes of the disputing parties and helps mediators find the key priorities to negotiate. Based on decision science and an easy-to-use interface, the Next Level Mediation platform can handle the most complex disputes. Register today at nextlevelmediation.com for your complimentary 30-day trial of the subscription service and enter the code ABA discount 20 for a 20% discount.
Debra, Harold, thank you so much for being on the program today. So with that in mind, I'd love to start with a question that really just sets the table for this entire discussion. And that is, and I'll start with you, Debra, what is the essence of mediation as a process of dispute resolution?
Well, thank you so much, Jason, and thank you again for the opportunity of being here as part of this show. You know, one of the things I like to share with people is that I fell in love with mediation when I suddenly found myself working in employment disputes regarding employees with employers with medical disputes, medical issues in the workplace. And I found mediation to be a very strategic and yet essential process to helping people come together with divergent thoughts, perspectives, views about issues that needed resolution as a way of successfully navigating through a strategic process. And so, what I see as the beauty, the essence of mediation is that it's a safe way for people to come together, again, with a strategy, with a process, with the end in mind, as far as reaching resolution in ways that both parties gain. So mutual resolution of the issues before them. And so, again, to me, it's about psychological safety, people being in conflict, people approach conflict from different perspectives, and by having a facilitated process with the aid of a mediator, then we're creating that process for people to successfully and safely come together regarding issues where they're at odds.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Harold, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you the same question. In your view, what is the essence of mediation as a process of dispute resolution?
Jason, the essence of mediation, in my judgment, can be summed up with the alliteration of the 3 P's. And by that, I mean people, problem solving, and peacemaking. That is the real essence of the process. And as our listeners may know, mediation as a non-adjudicative form of dispute resolution is really intended to be cooperative and collaborative rather than adversarial. I will tell you, in my over 30 years in the ADR field and having mediated so many litigated disputes, it's regrettable that all too often counsel and sometimes parties themselves view the participants in mediation as being adversaries. It's an extension of the adversarial trial process, and that it is not. It really is meant to be different in tone, in approach, and even attitude. So it's about people, problem solving, and peacemaking. One thing I always like to underscore in any presentation on mediation is that this process is first, fundamentally, and foremost about people, not first and foremost about the law, not first and foremost about the facts. Although those are important, it is first, fundamentally, and foremost about people. And if we all keep that in mind, mediators for sure will certainly always do the next indicated right thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And so that brings me to my next question. And Debra, I'd love to start with you again. How do you feel that mediation is distinguishable from other processes in the ADR field?
That's a great question because, so often people, view conflict as something to be avoided or something to aggressively embrace. And so very often conflict resolution or dispute resolution, as Harold just mentioned, embraces much more of an adversarial approach. Who's the winner? Rather than, again, I'll use the words both gain. And so, again, the mediation process is not about arguing your position, arguing your case, but instead, what's important to you and what needs to be resolved to bring resolution. And so it's much more, and again, I'll just draw on what Harold just mentioned, it's a collaborative approach, not a confrontational approach. And that's the essence of where mediation is so different from arbitration or, the legal process, in that people come together to mutually resolve differences, whatever they might be about, whether it's family, workplace, some other commercial or civil differences. But it's about people coming together and working through their differences in hopefully amicable ways, not confrontational ways.
Thank you very much. And coming back to you, Harold, because I'd be remiss if I didn't give you the opportunity to answer this question, particularly given your history as an arbitrator, a conciliator, as well as a mediator. How do you view mediation as being distinguishable from those other ADR processes?
Well, I got to tell you, Jason, at the risk of repeating myself ad nauseum, I can't emphasize enough how mediation is intended to be non-adversarial in not only tone, but in approach, in style, but also in attitude. It is really meant to be cooperative, and we have to see the parties and participants as really being collaborators in the interest of joint problem solving, so different from adjudicative processes of arbitration on the one hand and litigation on the other, where parties are truly adversaries, and there is very typically going to be a win-loss outcome. Not true in mediation. We can truly try to achieve a mutual win, a both win. I've heard it expressed as that before, a win-win outcome that really addresses, hopefully, the core interest. This word interest is a broad statement that means the real deep needs and concerns, fears, aspirations, and motivations of the parties, the real people living this horror called a conflict, especially when it escalates to the point of litigation. And that's what the magic of mediation is. It is really about party self-determination, and where parties can really control their own fate. And that is, for me, the most important distinction between mediation as a non-adversarial process and adjudication, whether it be arbitration or litigation, which of course is just that. It is adversarial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that brings me to the next question. When we talk about mediation, in a number of circles, there's been a lot of debate, a lot of rancor in regards to education for mediators and how do we distinguish quality mediators. So in your view, Harold, and obviously I want to start with you on this, what are the minimum educational requirements for entry to the profession?
Well, Jason, the education requirements are largely dictated by what I call court-connected mediation programs that are available in most major metropolitan areas across the country. In the late 80s and in the well into the 90s, the courts really got behind mediation because of a number of decisions that emanated all the way from the U.S. Supreme Court down through inferior courts, to where we saw mediation as really being magical to help relieve court dockets. So for that reason, different courts then started mediation programs first as pilots, and they defined the minimum education requirements, which are largely true even to this day. And they are as follows. A bachelor's degree is typically required for credentialing to be on a court-connected program. Bachelor's degree at a minimum educationally, and it can be in any field. And I am so excited about that because mediation is highly interdisciplinary. And though it's used in litigated cases quite a bit, the reality is that lawyers don't necessarily have a corner on that market or preoccupy the space. It is highly interdisciplinary. So any field of study at the bachelor's level will suffice. And then it requires, very typically, the modal value tends to be 30 hours. Some jurisdictions require 40, some require 25, but the modal value appears to be 30 hours across the United States of actual formal mediation training, of which 12 of those 30 hours must have a practical simulation, case simulation, role play, experiential component to it. In addition to that, it requires, of course, references, professional references, and it will very typically require that a new mediator have in fact mediated, and there are different requirements depending on the court system, but very typically anywhere from at least 5 cases from beginning to end throughout all phases of the mediation process, from initial planning through convening, through rounds of joint discussion and caucusing, through conclusion. And those tend to be the predominant qualifying criteria to get on a court panel these days. There is no state licensure per se, so there's nothing else in the public space that imposes mandatory minimum education requirements. So what we try to do is track what the courts are doing and requiring for court annex mediation purposes.
And I appreciate those, the 3 aspects of mediation education, particularly from the education component, which, to the point that you mentioned earlier, a bachelor's degree in any area of study, that really speaks to the diversity of the mediation field, right? And it allows for more people to be in that space, which serves the general public as I see it. Then obviously going into the performance component and having the ability to demonstrate your skills as a mediator in live action mediations. I think that's extremely important. And I know as the executive director of AAA-Mediation.org, I know that, AAA-Mediation.org has panels themselves. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to the qualifications for those panels? And are they similar? Do they go a little bit above and beyond? Tell us a little bit about that.
They are very similar, except they do go beyond, because to then become what we call an affiliate mediator with the AAA-Mediation.org panel, one has to have more advanced mediation training. They have to also have mediated quite a few more cases, and is really meant for the more advanced practitioner. One neat thing about AAA-Mediation.org is that we cast a very wide net. In other words, independent mediators who also may service areas in which the association doesn't necessarily provide mediation services in the areas such as family. Another might be probate, another might be elder law, these really specialized areas. Well, AAA-Mediation.org affiliate mediators can come from those fields and find a home and have an opportunity to grow in this vibrant community of mediators and exercise thought leadership. So another great thing, as you just said, Jason, is the diversity that is really promoted by viewing mediation as an interdisciplinary field for which there is no one entry into the profession. Yeah, lawyers use it a lot, and as you'd expect, legal people, legal practitioners, those trained in the law certainly should be comfortable and know quite a bit about it. And certainly if they are going to be a lawyer mediator. However, the principals, the parties who come to us with their conflicts and their disputes are not just lawyers and don't necessarily come from the legal field. So we need mediators who can relate to people in a wide spectrum based upon diversity of life experiences and diversity of education.
And I think that's so important, because one of the things that I think we tend to do is conflate expertise in one field with competence in another, and that's one of the best reasons why I think that the education component that AAA-Mediation.org requires from their affiliate mediators, their affiliate panel, as it were, is so important. And when we speak about the diversity and just the emphasis on the educational aspect. But one aspect that I would like to follow up with you on, Harold, is the continuing education piece. What do you believe to be the minimum continuing education required to maintain practice efficiency?
Well, it's interesting, Jason, because that varies again across the board, depending on who the regulating agency is, whether it be a court or whether it be a private entity or nonprofit entities such as the American Arbitration Association. But what I have seen to be kind of the absolute minimum is at least 4 hours of advanced continuing education each year for practicing mediators. And that is a real bare minimum. It truly is. And it very typically can be in any aspect of people and problem solving and peacemaking. It is not necessarily prescribed to automatically have to relate to any one subject. Very typically, at least for lawyers who want mediation credit towards their statutory obligation for CLE, they will want some ethics credit as part of that. So you'll find the better, in my judgment, mediation continuing education programs will also feature ethics. Mediation ethics, might even be negotiation ethics for lawyer, but it's something I will tell you and assure you at the association that we really are serious about, and I've tried to build into all of our mediation course offerings, is an ethical overlay to everything. Ethics is the thread that runs throughout all of our trainings, no matter if they be in the hard skills, technical skills of negotiation, etc., or be on the people side, the soft skills. They all have an ethical bent. And why is that important? I always like to say, we need not mediate perfectly. If we're honest and transparent, none of us ever has, none of us ever will. We need not mediate perfectly. We need only mediate effectively and ethically. and hence the import of ethics as ongoing, continuing mediator education.
I think that's fantastic, and I couldn't agree more, particularly from the ethics standpoint. But when we talk about continuing education, I think there's a mindset that Harold, you have described as a lifelong learning mindset, and when we talk about that, and Debra, I'd love to come back to you on this. Why is a quote lifelong learning mindset critical to mediation service and practice success?
Well, I'll jump in on that one because I think, going back to what Harold first said as far as the minimum of training is it's one thing to know and understand the process, the roadmap, so to speak, about how to navigate people through discussion of their issues, their differences, their perspectives, the impact of the dispute on them. So that's the process. That's what you get in the basic learning. But then people are people, and the diversity and the depth of understanding people in conflict is where we need to continue to learn and to understand. And that's one thing about the process of mediation. It's a confidential process. And so the thing is we don't readily have people who observe and give feedback, unless you're in some kind of training program. And, I had the good fortune for many years to work with the Navy's program and was a mentor to many mediators. And it's I like to say how we show up matters. And so how we come across, the words we use. And that's one thing I know Harold and I share a passion around as far as, keeping the litigation lingo from the courtroom out of the mediation process, because we're not here to be adversaries, we're here to collaborate. And so the words we use become very important. And that's where, I have such great fun, quite frankly, being an avid educator and a lifelong learner and teacher myself, about helping shed insight to people in terms of how to approach things differently. And that's one of the things I enjoy bringing to the field as well, as the understanding of the neuroscience behind human behavior in conflict, because there are strategies and, again, techniques, words that we can use that can help mitigate, de-escalate the emotional intensity that shows up for people. And that's what we continue to learn. If we look at the medical field and what we continue to learn and understand about the human being and the mindset, then that's what we as professionals, with our ethical responsibilities of safely guiding people through conflict, becomes so imperative. And the only way we can do that is by continuing to engage in lifelong learning.
Absolutely. And when you talk about the mindset, obviously neuroscience is absolutely a part of that, because that is literally the mindset. Harold, I'd be remiss if I didn't come back to you with the same question. The concept of lifelong learning mindsets. In your view, what makes it critical to mediation service as well as practice success?
Jason, and it's interesting. I was very privileged and blessed to attend a very good private high school in the Midwest. And in our model, which I will tell you necessarily at the time didn't really mean that much to me, because I didn't have the prism of experience. But now that I look back after many, many decades, how right they were. The school's motto was learning today, leading tomorrow. Learning today, leading tomorrow. Why must lifelong learning be part of one's individual ethos? Is because leading and the roles we've prepared to do, and especially the roles we assume as healers of conflict and stepping in as effective and ethical interveners, requires ongoing, rich, deep, thought-provoking, really value-conferred learning. I tried to find the source of this quote, but I couldn't do it, because I want to give a proper attribution. But the quote is that, very simply, the key to learning is in not knowing. The key to learning is in not knowing. And I recently had a really, really difficult commercial real estate case that I was invited in as intervener, mediator, to help these really sophisticated business people resolve landlord, tenant, and the ultimate resolution turned on some creative financing, dealing with what's called internal rates of return, and also net present value. And I've done commercial cases. I understand the basic concepts, but it got so nuanced, and I was in over my head in terms of just the finer aspects of accounting, of finance, on which a deal ultimately was going to turn. So what I had to do was use my mediator skills, focusing on process facilitation, to help these individuals see, number one, I was teachable and I'm learning, but really ultimately, no one is in a better position to craft a resolution that works for them better than they would be. And if I, as a trained and experienced mediator, and who did understand quite a bit about the finance aspects of this, couldn't quite get all of it and the nuances, imagine what a jury is going to struggle with. Imagine what a judge is going to struggle with, perhaps even an arbitrator, and how then I was able to coach them into really giving this process its best, leveraging their expertise. And of course, we did get to a full resolution. But all of this, I believe, is cloaked in this mantra of lifelong learning. We must be lifelong learners to discharge this very, very important work to which we've been charged ethically and effectively.
And one of the things that you mentioned in that entire answer is, I think a very important aspect, and that being, obviously you mentioned the key to learning is not knowing, but in the not knowing, there's a humility, right? There's a humility in being willing to ask the questions, even if you feel as though you know the subject matter. To the willingness and the humility in asking the questions and seeking to understand, seeking to learn is such a huge aspect as well.
You are spot on, Jason. And I'll tell you, Dr. Dupree, with whom I've done an awful lot of training and have learned so much from, she could speak to this more deeply than I could, because she's trained in the neurosciences and the psychological sciences. But it's the most interesting thing to build on your point. In making ourselves vulnerable and transparent and realizing that the key to learning is in not knowing, seeking that assistance, that help, meaning that we're teachable, I find people want to rise to the occasion and they want to meet that need. They want to help. And that's a great thing that builds bridges and can certainly present pathways to resolution.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to
Debra,
add
please.
to what Harold is that, with that, that is, like you mentioned, Jason, is the humility and therefore the vulnerability, because oftentimes it's pride that gets in the way of people, reaching resolution by saying, help me understand. I'm seeing the picture, but I'm not quite seeing, the differences of the details. And so that's where, as a mediator, we're often in the role of modeling, behavior that's helpful to shifting people to resolution. And so showing our own vulnerability by saying, help me understand or say more about that. I'm not quite connecting the dots here because sometimes people are talking and they don't realize where there are gaps in the information and where there may be a lack of understanding. And so, again, I see our role as mediators is helping bring that to light, bring that to surface. And as Harold said in his eloquent quote, lifelong learning is in what we don't know. And so seeking to understand what we can learn and how to have learning conversations, not difficult confrontations.
That's really good. And really to go back to the first question that I asked the both of you, when we talk about the essence of mediation, I think we might be able to say that the essence of a mediator is modeled humility, right? We're teaching our parties to be willing to put themselves out there through asking the questions and sharing of themselves in a slightly different way. I think that's fantastic. I'd love to ask you another question. Harold, I'd love to start with you on this. We've talked about, the essence of mediation. We've talked about the education for mediation, but in your view, as a person who has been a part of this field for so many years, just how should one define mediation success? How do you define success for a mediator?
I'm going to actually take a stab at this, Jason, by looking at the obverse. I'll tell you, in my judgment, how you don't define and measure mediation success. It should not be in terms of deal or no deal. It should not be in terms of, quote, settlement, end quote, as so many have fallen prey to that fallacy, thinking that, well, on game day, if we don't get a, quote, settlement, end quote, then what a big waste of time this was. The mediation, if done ethically and effectively, has so many positive outcomes, whether or not there is a deal, so to speak, on game day. How many of us have had cases where it didn't resolve on the day when we convened the parties for plenary mediation, but it resolved shortly thereafter, within 2 weeks, maybe a month, who knows, after parties have had a chance to go back and to reconstruct in their own minds and reflect on things. And maybe we have really opened the communication lines to the point where now, for the first time, they can both look within themselves in terms of really, what am I really in this for? What do I really need? And also look without in terms of, well, how can I more productively engage the other party so we can hopefully now get this resolved? Unfortunately, we have a consuming marketplace that tends to measure mediation success in terms of whether or not we get a settlement, and that is the terminal objective on game day. I have come to learn, and this was an educational function as well as a practice proficiency function, but I have come to learn that very simply, what we need to do is bring value to the process. And then, when we do that, and we assist parties with getting the absolute best information that they can get in coming to an informed decision as to what's in their best interest, then you don't have to hard sell settlement. You really don't. It becomes somewhat apparent. Now, of course, the plot thickens, and Dr. Dupree would certainly speak to this in terms of, before they could even get that far along, there may need to be a lot of emotional processing so they can get into the rational state of mind to where they can then take a more objective look at the information needed to make a decision and to weigh that information in terms of, how efficacious is it, the strengths, weaknesses, etc. But it all presupposes that we first stabilize the patient. So there's a whole other aspect to this, Jason, to where the emotional dimension of mediation has to be dealt with first so we can get to the other part. So let me just circle back and just conclude with this. We don't measure mediation success in terms of deal or no deal. Mediation success should be measured, in my judgment, in terms of the value brought to the process to enable parties to constructively engage, to get the best information they can, to weigh in reaching their expression of self-determination as to what the appropriate outcome should be, and whether then, no matter what that outcome is, they can achieve cognitive peace because of the process. Even if the outcome is not what they necessarily would have wanted, even if it settles, then they're not necessarily happy with the settlement. If they can walk away from the process and say, but you know what, I was treated respectfully, I was heard, I was in some ways validated, and you know what, I feel good about the process, and I think it might make me a little more adept at navigating conflict on my own in the future. Jason, those are outstanding outcomes. So we don't measure it in terms of deal or no deal. It's just not that simple.
Well, and you bring up something very important there. When you talk about shifting away from the mindset of deal or no deal and that being the barometer for success, when we juxtapose that with the marketplace mindset of, it's a win or a loss, right? You get the deal or you don't get the deal. That can tend to become a slippery slope, because then with that added pressure can come the temptation to fold on ethical matters. And it brings to mind and I'd love for you to talk about this briefly if you can. It brings to mind a program that you did, years back that had a very provocative title called "Lying for the Sake of the Deal." Can you tell me a little bit about that particular program and how that relates to your answer about how we should define mediation success and ultimately how we should teach the marketplace what success should look like?
Well, and I want to give attribution also to my good colleague, Becky Callahan. She and I did a series of presentations before bar associations and others on that very topic, and we penned an article on it. It is very simply titled, Zeal for the Deal. Okay, what mediators, parties, and counsel alike will do in their zeal to get a deal. And it has to do with deception and lying and slanting, et cetera, at mediation, all of which are very, very highly unethical. And you're right, Jason. I mean, there's a consuming marketplace that expects results, and the result they have in mind is very simply that, settlement. If it doesn't settle, then they fall into this binary thinking, win or lose. Either we settled or we didn't, and therefore you're either a winner or a loser. And it's just not that simple. There can be many impediments to resolution on a particular day for settlement that are all very, very, very earnest, very, very real. And then the good mediator, the effective mediator, will try to help navigate around and through that, so that if we're not quite ready to mediate outcome today, then let's mediate process to ready ourselves for outcome down the road. So it's not so simple as because counsel, as an example, select a particular date on which to motivate or which to mediate, and then we automatically assume that they're ready. They're ready substantively. The parties are ready substantively, attitudinally, and emotionally. They may not be, and you don't learn that until you get to mediation, unless mediators do, as Dr. Dupree and I teach and really espouse and practice, really spend the time on the front end in the prep. Okay, much more time spent in the prep than maybe even the time at mediation to assess and diagnose a number of things in answering the question, are we truly ready? Operative term underscored ready. Are we truly ready to mediate?
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Dr. Dupree, I'd love to come to you and ask you the same question. How do you define mediation success?
Well, thank you for that opportunity. I just want to tap into a few things that Harold has already mentioned. I will say, earlier in my career, when I used to train professionals from various walks of life to become workplace mediators, I remember meeting one individual from another state who said, "Well, how many mediations have you won?" And it's like I just looked at him dumbfounded, going, "What? One? I mean, excuse me." So that's mindset right there. It's about reaching resolution, and so ABA, ACR, Association for Conflict Resolution, AAA, have all been engaged in research in the past, and so statistics have steadily shown that even when people don't reach resolution in their mediation, although mediation is highly successful, a good 80 to 90% of the time, that people are still highly satisfied with the process. And from my experience, in particular the type of issues that I mediate, primarily in workplace and in some family, it's oftentimes mediation is the first time they've been able to speak and be heard about what their concerns are and how they've been impacted by whatever the dispute is. And so the success of mediation, yes, our goal is resolution of the issues, but it's really the facilitation of people to be able to address their concerns in a way that, that they feel safe. I'll go back to that again, and that they feel heard. And so that's something that we as mediators, I think is critical. It's of essence in our professional and ethical roles to ensure that people are being heard in the process. And that then leads to success on the part of mediation, whether or not they've reached resolution. And so And that's where I go back to, we talked about words matter, and even the use of deal or no deal. Excuse me. How about just we're seeking resolution, the issues that brought you to the table. And so this is where we need to change our nomenclature in the mediation process to make sure that it really is achieving the intended goals and intended outcomes of what the process is really designed to do.
Could I build on something very, very quickly? I want to commend to everyone's listening a podcast that Dr. Dupree and I did on this very topic of words. And we titled it Words Matter, Mediation and the Language of Lawyering. Mediation and the language of lawyering. And what we do there is we really unpack this and look at the terminology and phraseology that's used at mediation that really can be counterproductive to the process. Do we really have to refer to the parties as your opponent or opposing counsel? You're talking about or even, I don't even like the phraseology, the other side. It just forces polarized thinking. So we talk about the different terms that are used that are not efficacious towards what we're trying to do. And we need to step out of that adversarial bit.
Absolutely. I mean, when we think about the terms we use, it absolutely assumes an adversarial model. And so I echo the invitation for the listener to check out that particular podcast, Words Matter. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And with that in mind, I'd like to, just do a small pivot. Harold, coming back to you in talking about this upcoming institute. And so the question that I have is, how does the ABA Institute's public service focus align with that of AAA-Mediation.org, which is a division of the nonprofit dispute resolution provider organization, American Arbitration Association?
Well, the American Arbitration Association is the largest and the oldest of all of the dispute resolution providers, formed in 1926, and we have actually administered hundreds of thousands of mediations in this nearly 100-year history, even though mediation isn't technically in our name. Well, I guess it is. It is in AAA-Mediation.org now. It truly is. But the point is, we operate in the nonprofit space. Everything we do, in the words of our CEO, I think is so well stated, is for the cause of the 3 Ps: the parties, the process, and the public. The parties, everything we do has to really bring value and meet the real serviceable needs of the parties who repose their trust and their confidence in us to administer neutral and really quality-driven processes, confidential ADR processes, mediation being chief among them. The process of ADR itself, to make sure that we are thought leaders in this space for ethical practice of ADR. And then thirdly, the public. Everything that we do is for the public good. We're not not a for-profit entity. Maximizing shareholder wealth is not what it's about for us, because we exist for the public good. And that brings us squarely into alignment with the ABA, because as a nonprofit industry association of lawyers, the largest and the oldest also, that is precisely why ABA exists and why I'm so excited to now co-chair for the 5th year in a row the Advanced Mediation and Advocacy Skills Training Institute, because education is central to both nonprofit missions, those of the American Arbitration Association and AAMediation.org, and on the one hand, and ABA on the other. So we are totally and squarely in alignment. It's another reason why we at the association are so proud to be platinum sponsor again to the ABA for this really, really heady, deep, rich think tank and clinic that we offer each year in the form of advanced mediation and advocacy skills training.
Fantastic. And Debra, I know you have a significant hand in the preparation and the planning for this particular institute. So I would love to to get your answer on this. What is the mission of the ABA's annual Advanced Mediation and Advocacy Skills Training Institute?
I am very excited to be part of the planning committee and to bring together, various perspectives. And that's exactly what this conference is all about, is to take a look at leading social, behavioral, and legal authorities in the field to bring together different perspectives about how to deal with people in conflict, strategies, thinking, models, and so forth. And to really, as we talked about before, the interdisciplinary approach, because people are people, and conflict is conflict, and conflicts arise in all kinds of things that are not necessarily legally based, but still people, relational, community efforts. And so it's really an opportunity to continue our learning, our vision for where the field is going, and particularly in the post-pandemic era. We've learned a lot in the early stages of the pandemic about, many of us believe, we have to be in person for mediation. And yet, quite surprisingly, we've had some huge successes in conducting mediations virtually. And so continuing to look at not only how we can effectively and ethically deliver mediation and facilitate mediations virtually and in person, but really what truly works for our parties, and then the technological aspects of it as well. And so it's really, again, to advance the learning among all people involved in the field of dispute resolution. And what I really particularly enjoy for this conference is, the focus on how advocates can show up and prepare their parties, their clients for mediation, because they're integral components of many mediation settings. And so how can we further that collaboration rather than adversity mindsets in the mediation process? And so that's really the mission, is bringing people together from all fields to look at the advances of what we've learned, what we can still learn, and how can we continue to intensify.
Fantastic. And then when we talk about, what the Institute is going to feature this year, it goes in a number of directions. Your keynote speakers being Alexandra Carter and Ken Cloak, which are both going to be fantastic and amazing. But when we even look at the breakout sessions, I know that Debra, you are a part of one particular breakout called Effective Emotional Interventions. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm really proud to collaborate once again with Harold, as well as our collaborator, Bill Eddy. We did a joint presentation for another organization about a year ago. And so this is a deeper dive into, the emotional elements behind people in conflict and what drives them. As Harold said before, is that, if we don't deal with the emotional elements behind people in conflict before we really get to the factual things, we may never reach resolution. And from a psychological neuroscience perspective, we know emotions precede cognitions, and so it's really critical that we as professionals working with people in conflict know how to effectively bring out emotions, but also manage emotions in the heat of conflict. And so that's what our plenary is all about, is taking a look at how do we address the emotional elements of people in conflict, and how do we strategically manage that to successfully help them reach resolution. So it's a pretty fascinating area, and we're excited to bring to the professionals in the field those depths of the psychological components.
Well, that sounds very, very exciting and very, thought-provoking. What would be the best way for people to find out and learn more about this particular institute?
Well, we can certainly, we have an excellent conference brochure, but certainly visiting the ABA, it's called the AMBAR.org/med 2022. That's the website for it, and they can easily sign up, and we're still accepting registrations, and we're really looking for a tremendous turnout on December 1st through the 3rd, coming up very soon, and excited about our final stages.
Fantastic. And so, I want to thank both you and Harold for your time. And as we wrap up our conversation today, There's one final question. I'd like to start with Harold, and then Debra, Dr. Dupree, you can round us out. But what do you foresee as the future of mediation domestically and internationally? Harold, I'd love to hear from you.
I think we're going to continue to see mediation expand because of its high utility. And we talked about success earlier, defining success for just that is very high success rate in terms of offering meaningful alternatives to the traditional court system and allowing for greater access to justice. So we'll continue to just this upward trajectory it's been on literally now for the last 3 decades. What we're going to see also, and with all the intel that the association we receive and in the circles in which I travel and the training that I do, I will tell you, Jason, that mixed modes and hybrid processes are really starting to come of age. In the international ADR community, MEDAR and then ARP MEDAR have been around for quite some time, and they're very, very well received in certain cultures, and especially in what are called civil law jurisdictions. We're going to start to see more of that stateside too. We really are. Blending of processes. It does present some potential challenges on the ethics front to make sure that if there are to be blendings of roles or mixing of roles, that is done in a way that's envisioned by Standard 6 or the Model Standards of Conduct for mediators on quality of the process. But those issues can be mitigated. We're aware of what's going on.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Dr. Debra Dupree, I would love to hear what you foresee as the future of mediation domestically and internationally.
Thank you. Having been a longtime educator in the mediation field, sometimes I'm surprised that we're not further along. But then again, what I would say, like in so many aspects of today's world, is that there's been a real burgeoning explosion, I see, of the use of mediation, and particularly because of virtual access to it. It's made it easier for people to access the use of mediation for resolution of the disputes. And we've got a long way to go in educating, and that's why efforts like this are so wonderful as far as helping people understand that this is a tool, a highly effective tool for helping people reach resolution. And because I have spoken and taught internationally too, I'm really impressed with what I see other countries doing in the expanding application of mediation in various aspects. And one of the things that I was encouraged by too is, given some of our community unrest that we've experienced, in the last couple of years, I'm seeing more mobile units of dispute resolution reaching out into communities. And so I think that that's just excellent. So I think there's going to continue to be very innovative and entrepreneurial kinds of ways of how to get services out there. And I say entrepreneurial not from a financially lucrative perspective, but instead innovative ideas for how to make mediation as a tool for dispute resolution more accessible across venues, not just in the legal circles, but in the community circles as well.
That's fantastic. And one recurring theme in both of your answers was the word access, and that increased access as we move forward in this particular field. I want to thank you both so much for lending your thoughts and your expertise to this particular program. For Dr. Debra Dupree and for Harold Coleman, I'm Jason Harper, and this has been Resolutions, a podcast about dispute resolution and prevention. Take it easy.